I watched the color drain from his face when I slid the shareholder documents across that conference table. 2 years of planning, months of silent acquisitions, all for this single moment when Richard Drummond, the man who'd called me expendable 60 seconds earlier, realized he was looking at his new boss. Welcome to Cheating Story Exposed. Real stories, real justice, no sugarcoating. You know what? I notice many of you watching haven't hit that subscribe button yet. Here's the thing, we drop stories like this every single day. Stories about people who got played, got smart, and got even. If you want to see how these situations really end, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. My name is Nathan Cross, and I'm a 42-year-old software architect who learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or immediate. Sometimes it's patient, calculated, and absolutely devastating. Let me take you back to where this started. 3 years ago, I was the Senior Development Director at Apex Solutions, a mid-sized tech firm in Seattle with about 200 employees and annual revenues hovering around 40 million. We specialized in enterprise resource planning software, not sexy, but profitable and stable. I'd been with the company for 8 years, working my way up from a junior developer position. I knew every system, every client relationship, every revenue stream. Richard Drummond joined as Chief Operating Officer about 6 months after I made director. He came from a larger firm with an impressive resume and an even more impressive ego. From day one, Richard made it clear he viewed anyone who'd been at Apex longer than him as dead weight from the old guard. He wanted his own people in key positions. The problem was, I was very good at my job. Our development team consistently delivered ahead of schedule. Client satisfaction scores were the highest they'd been in company history. We'd landed 3 major contracts in my first year as director, adding nearly 8 million in annual recurring revenue. The founders, 2 brothers named Paul and Vincent Mercer, appreciated results. That made me difficult to remove, so Richard got creative. It started small. He'd schedule important meetings during times I'd blocked off for client calls, then act surprised when I couldn't attend. He'd send company-wide emails about new initiatives without mentioning they were based on proposals I'd submitted weeks earlier. He'd reassign my best developers to other projects without consultation, then criticize me for missed deadlines. I documented everything. Every email, every meeting note, every instance of credit theft or deliberate sabotage. Not because I planned to use it immediately, but because I'd learned early in my career that corporate warfare requires ammunition. The real escalation began about 18 months ago. Apex had been approached by a potential acquisition target, a smaller firm called Dataflow Systems with proprietary algorithms that could significantly enhance our product offerings. The Mercer brothers asked me to conduct technical due diligence and provide a recommendation. I spent 6 weeks analyzing Dataflow's codebase, interviewing their development team, and stress-testing their algorithms. My conclusion was unambiguous. The acquisition would be transformative. Their technology would cut our development time by 30% and open up markets we couldn't currently serve. I recommended we move forward immediately. I presented my findings to the executive team. Richard sat through the entire presentation with this slight smirk, never asking a single question. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. This is interesting work, Nathan, but I think we need a more strategic perspective before making a recommendation to the board. I'll have my team review these findings and prepare a comprehensive analysis. His team spent 2 weeks reformatting my report and adding a bunch of business school jargon. Then Richard presented it to the board as his recommendation. The Dataflow acquisition moved forward and became one of the most successful decisions in company history. At the announcement party, multiple board members congratulated Richard on his strategic vision. I smiled and kept my mouth shut. I was learning something valuable about Richard. He was very good at taking credit, but he didn't actually understand the technical details behind the work. That would matter later. Around this same time, something interesting happened with Apex's ownership structure. The Mercer brothers, both in their mid-60s, started talking privately about succession planning. They'd built Apex from nothing 20 years earlier, but neither had children interested in running a tech company. They were considering options: sell to a larger firm, bring in outside investors, or transition leadership to existing executives. Vincent mentioned this to me during a golf outing. He valued my opinion and wanted to know what I thought would be best for the company's culture and technical direction. I told him the truth. A sale to a large corporation would gut the company culture and probably lead to mass layoffs. Outside investors would push for short-term returns over long-term stability. The best option was management transition, but only to people who understood both the business and the technology. That conversation stuck with me, especially when I started noticing Richard having private lunches with certain board members, especially when I overheard him on a phone call talking about positioning for the transition. Richard was making his move for CEO, and he was doing it by systematically eliminating anyone who might compete with him. I was clearly on that list. The next incident confirmed it. We had a critical product launch scheduled, a major upgrade that 3 enterprise clients were waiting for. 2 weeks before deployment, Richard suddenly reassigned half my development team to a strategic priority project he refused to specify. When I pushed back, he sent an email to the Mercer brothers expressing concern about my resistance to executive directives and questioning my commitment to company priorities. I had a choice. I could fight him directly, create drama, and probably lose because Richard had been carefully building political capital with the board. Or I could do something smarter. I called my attorney, Mitchell Torres. Mitchell had handled my wife's estate planning and helped me with some investment structures. I asked him a hypothetical question. If someone wanted to gradually acquire equity in a privately held company without alerting current management, how would they structure it? Mitchell got quiet for a moment. Nathan, that's a very specific question. Are we talking about your company, maybe? Just exploring options. He explained the mechanics. Set up a limited liability company as the purchasing entity. Make offers to minority shareholders at fair market value, maybe slightly above. Use discrete intermediaries for negotiations. Keep everything confidential through non-disclosure agreements. Stay below ownership thresholds that would trigger notification requirements in the company bylaws. I asked what kind of capital would be required. He ran some estimates based on Apex's valuation and shareholder structure. To acquire a controlling interest, 51%, I'd probably need somewhere between $8 and $12 million. That number should have stopped me. But I'd been smart with money. My wife Julia and I had lived modestly despite my salary increases. After Julia died from ovarian cancer 4 years ago, I'd thrown myself into work and let her life insurance pay out and our savings sit in conservative investments. I'd also received substantial bonuses from those client contracts Richard later took credit for, between liquid assets and credit lines backed by my investment portfolio. I could access about $10 million. It would be every dollar I had. If it failed, I'd be financially devastated. But something had shifted in me since Julia's death. She'd always told me I was too passive when people mistreated me, too willing to avoid conflict. I'd promised her near the end that I'd stop letting people walk over me. This felt like keeping that promise. I told Mitchell to start quietly. He reached out to shareholders through his firm, making discreet inquiries about whether they'd be interested in selling equity. There were 12 shareholders besides the Mercer brothers, most holding between 1% and 5%. They were early employees, retired executives, and a couple of angel investors from Apex's startup days. Several hadn't been actively involved with the company in years. The first acquisition took 3 weeks to negotiate. A retired VP named Gerald Chen owned 3%. He was 74 years old and happy to liquidate at 15% above the last independent valuation. Mitchell structured the purchase through an LLC called Cascade Investment Holdings. My name appeared nowhere in the public documents. Over the next 8 months, we acquired equity from 7 more shareholders. Most were straightforward transactions, people who were pleased to get a premium price for shares they'd been holding passively. 2 required more negotiation, including one shareholder who suspected something was happening and tried to leverage a higher price. Mitchell held firm on fair market value plus 15%. Eventually, she accepted. During this entire period, Richard escalated his campaign against me. He started excluding me from executive meetings, claiming my technical focus wasn't necessary for strategic discussions. He moved my office to a different floor, separating me from my development team. He hired a new VP of engineering, a guy named Trevor Wick from his previous company, and started routing my teams worked through Trevor for strategic alignment. The message was clear. I was being managed out. Richard was creating documentation of marginalization, building a case that I was resistant to change and not suited for senior leadership. When the time came to push me out, he'd have a paper trail showing I was already disconnected from company direction. I let him think it was working. I attended fewer meetings, stopped fighting his changes, kept my head down, and focused on my team's deliverables. To everyone watching, it looked like Nathan Cross was becoming irrelevant. Richard actually started treating me with dismissive pity instead of hostility, which told me he thought he'd won. What he didn't know was that I was spending my evenings in Mitchell's office, reviewing shareholder agreements and ownership documents. What he didn't know was that Cascade Investment Holdings now owned 38% of Apex Solutions. The last major acquisition was the most delicate. I needed to get to 51%, which meant I needed shares from either Paul or Vincent Mercer. Their combined ownership was 48%, with Paul holding 26% and Vincent holding 22%. Mitchell and I discussed the approach carefully. The Mercer brothers were loyal to Apex and protective of the company culture. A direct approach might backfire, but Vincent had made that comment about succession planning, and I'd noticed recently that he'd been missing more meetings, looking tired. His wife had mentioned at a company event that they were spending more time at their vacation home in Arizona. I asked Mitchell to reach out to Vincent personally, not through intermediaries, but direct contact. Mitchell's pitch was simple. Vincent, you've built something remarkable here, and you've been thinking about your exit strategy. I represent an investor who shares your vision for Apex's future and wants to ensure the company maintains its technical excellence and culture. Would you consider selling a portion of your equity at a substantial premium? Vincent asked who the investor was. Mitchell said he was bound by confidentiality during negotiations, but could disclose that it was someone who understood Apex intimately and had the company's best interests in mind. That could mean a competitor, a private equity firm, or another insider. Vincent didn't press. The negotiation took 6 weeks. Vincent wanted 30% above valuation, more than I'd paid anyone else. He also wanted approval rights on any major changes to company direction for 2 years post-sale. Mitchell counteroffered at 22% premium with approval rights for 1 year. We settled at 25% premium and 18-month approval rights. Vincent sold me 15% of his equity, keeping 7% for himself. The transaction closed on a Thursday afternoon. Mitchell called me from the title company. Nathan, it's done. Cascade Investment Holdings now owns 53% of Apex Solutions. You're the majority shareholder. Congratulations. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes. I just bet my entire financial future on this play. There was no going back, but for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I had control again. The ownership transfer had to be reported to the board within 10 business days according to company bylaws. I told Mitchell to wait until day 9. I wanted to choose the moment. Richard unknowingly chose it for me. He scheduled an emergency executive meeting for a Friday afternoon. Urgent agenda, all senior leaders required. I knew what was coming. The development team had missed a deadline on one of Trevor's strategic alignment projects, a delay that was directly caused by Richard's resource reallocation decisions. But Richard was going to blame me. I arrived at the conference room early. Paul and Vincent Mercer were there, along with the CFO, the head of sales, Trevor Wick, and 2 board members, Lisa Hartwell and James Nguyen. Richard walked in precisely at 2 o'clock, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing his most serious expression. Thank you all for making time on short notice. We have a critical situation that requires immediate board attention. He opened his portfolio and distributed printed reports. I glanced at mine. It was a performance review, my performance review, that I'd never seen or been asked to contribute to. It was devastating. Missed deadlines. Poor team morale. Resistance to leadership. Inability to execute on strategic priorities. Recommendation, immediate termination for cause. Richard let us read in silence for a full minute. Then he looked directly at me. Nathan, I want to be clear that this isn't personal. You've been with Apex for a long time and you've made contributions. But the company has evolved and frankly, your skill set and leadership approach are no longer aligned with where we're headed. The board needs to understand that keeping you in a senior role is holding us back. Vincent looked uncomfortable. Nathan, this is pretty harsh. I know there have been some challenges, but termination for cause seems extreme. Richard shook his head with practiced regret. Vincent, I understand your loyalty to long-term employees, but we have documentation. missed deliverables, client complaints, team members requesting transfers away from his projects. The pattern is clear. Every word was either a distortion or an outright lie. The missed deliverables were from projects he deliberately starved of resources. The client complaints were from a single account where Richard had overridden my technical recommendations. The team transfer requests were people Richard had privately encouraged to ask for reassignments. Paul leaned forward. "What are you proposing?" Richard straightened his shoulders. "I'm recommending immediate termination. We'll offer a standard severance package. 2 months, non-disparagement agreement, benefits. Continuation. But we need to move quickly to avoid further damage." Lisa Hartwell, one of the board members, turned to me. "Nathan, do you want to respond to these allegations?" I'd planned what I'd say for weeks. I'd rehearsed it until every word was perfect. But in the moment, I decided to change the script. "Before I respond, Richard, I have a question. You used the word expendable in your email to the board last month when describing my position. You also used it in conversation with Trevor where you said, and I'm quoting from your text message, that I'm the most expendable senior leader we have. Do you stand by that assessment?" Richard's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected me to have access to his text messages with Trevor. But he'd gone too far to back down. "Yes, Nathan, I stand by that. In terms of strategic value to Apex's future, you are expendable. That's not an insult. It's a business reality." The room got very quiet. Vincent looked pained. Paul was unreadable. Lisa and James exchanged glances. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a leather folder. I'd had Mitchell prepare the documents that morning. I slid the folder across the polished conference table until it sat directly in front of Richard. "I appreciate your candor, Richard. So let me be equally candid. Open that folder." Richard frowned but opened it. His eyes scanned the first page. Then they went wide. He flipped to the second page, then the third. The color drained from his face so completely that Trevor actually asked if he was okay. The folder contained a complete summary of Cascade Investment Holdings' equity position in Apex Solutions, prepared by our corporate attorney and validated by our accounting firm. Share acquisition agreements, transfer documents, ownership certificates, all leading to one undeniable conclusion. The person Richard had just called expendable owned 53% of the company. I let him process it for a full 30 seconds before I spoke. "Those documents show that I, through Cascade Investment Holdings, now own controlling interest in Apex Solutions. The acquisition was completed over the past 8 months through lawful purchases from minority shareholders and most recently a portion of Vincent's equity. Vincent, thank you for trusting me with this. Paul, I hope you'll give me the same trust. Lisa, James, the board will need to formally acknowledge this ownership change, which is why Mitchell Torres, my attorney, submitted the required notification yesterday." Vincent was nodding slowly. He'd known this reveal was coming. Mitchell had told him it would happen soon. But he'd agreed to let me control the timing. Paul looked stunned but not angry. "Nathan, this is unexpected. But if Vincent approved the sale and everything was done properly, then I suppose congratulations are in order." Richard found his voice, though it came out hoarse. "This is a hostile takeover. You can't just—" I held up one hand. "Richard, I can and I did nothing hostile about it. Every transaction was conducted at fair market value or above. Every shareholder sold voluntarily. All documentation is in order. As the majority shareholder, I have the authority under our corporate bylaws to make certain decisions unilaterally and other decisions with board input. Let me start with one that doesn't require board approval." I pulled out a second document, one I'd prepared personally that morning. I slid it down the table to Richard. "That's your termination notice. Effective immediately, you're no longer Chief Operating Officer of Apex Solutions. You're no longer an officer, employee, or representative of this company in any capacity. Human Resources will arrange for your final paycheck. Security will escort you from the building." The room erupted. Trevor stood up so fast his chair fell backward. Paul shouted something I couldn't quite hear. Lisa was frantically checking her phone, probably messaging the company attorney. James just stared at me with something that might have been admiration. Richard's face went from white to red. "You can't do this. I have a contract. You'll hear from my lawyers." I kept my voice perfectly calm. "Your contract has a termination clause that allows for dismissal by the majority shareholder for any reason with 30 days notice or immediate termination with 30 days severance pay in lieu of notice. You're getting the severance. The only thing you won't get is the non-disparagement protection, because you're terminated for cause. Specifically, for systematically taking credit for work you didn't do, sabotaging projects to damage my reputation, and attempting to have me terminated with false documentation. I pulled out a third folder, this one much thicker. I placed it on the table but didn't open it. This folder contains every email, every meeting recording, every text message, and every document that proves what you've been doing for the past 18 months. The stolen credit for the data flow acquisition. The resource reallocations designed to cause deadline failures. The false performance reviews. I've been documenting everything, Richard. Everything. If you want to challenge your termination legally, we'll be happy to present this evidence in court. Or you can take your severance, sign the standard exit agreement, and move on quietly. Your choice. Richard stared at the folder. His hands were shaking slightly. He'd spent 2 years constructing a narrative of my inadequacy, never realizing I was building a counter-narrative twice as thorough. More importantly, he'd spent 2 years focused on office politics while I was buying the company out from under him. Trevor cleared his throat. This is insane. You can't just come in and fire people because you bought some shares. Trevor, I turned my attention to him. You're the VP of Engineering, a position Richard created specifically to undermine my authority and marginalize me within the organization. You've been here for 9 months. In that time, you've contributed nothing of technical value, slowed down 3 major projects with your bureaucratic approval processes, and caused 4 of our best developers to quit. You're also terminated, effective immediately. Your severance package will be 2 weeks, which is generous considering you're still in your probationary period. Trevor's mouth opened and closed. He looked to Richard for support, but Richard was staring at his termination papers like they were written in a foreign language. Paul finally found his voice. Nathan, I understand you're angry. You have reason to be, but firing 2 executives without warning in front of the board, this isn't how we do things at Apex. I met his eyes steadily. Paul, with respect, this is exactly how we're going to do things now. You and Vincent built an incredible company based on technical excellence and treating people fairly. Richard represented the opposite of both those values. He was going to push me out, then likely target other long-term employees who stood in his way of becoming CEO. I stopped him, not through politics or manipulation, but by investing everything I have into protecting this company's future. Vincent spoke quietly. Nathan, what are your intentions? You own the controlling stake. You could do anything. You could sell to a competitor, you could liquidate. You could turn Apex into something completely different. Prepared for this question, too. I pulled out one more document, a letter I'd written and had Mitchell review. This is a letter of commitment. It states that I, as majority shareholder, commit to maintaining Apex's technical focus, protecting the existing employee base, and consulting with Paul, Vincent, and the board on any major strategic decisions for the next 2 years. It also states that I'm not interested in the CEO position. I want to remain focused on what I do best, which is the technical and product direction. Paul, if you're willing, I'd like you to step into the CEO role formally. Vincent, I'd value your continued guidance as chairman of the board. The room had gone from chaos to stunned silence. Richard looked utterly broken. Trevor looked furious but impotent. Lisa and James were watching the entire situation like they were witnessing a masterclass in corporate maneuvering. Paul took the commitment letter and read it carefully. Then he looked up at me. You really did this just to stop Richard? No, I did this to save Apex. Richard was a symptom, not the disease. The disease was letting someone with no technical understanding and no respect for the people who built this company gain control of its direction. I fixed that disease by becoming the person who controls the direction. Vincent was smiling slightly. Julia would be proud of you, Nathan. She always said you were smarter than you let people see. The mention of my wife hit harder than I expected. My voice got rough. Julia told me to stop being passive. She told me to fight for things that mattered. This company matters. The people here matter. I wasn't going to let someone like Richard destroy it because I was too polite to stop him. Paul stood and extended his hand. I accept your offer. Let's make this transition work. I shook his hand, then Vincent's. Lisa and James came over to introduce themselves properly as board members to the new majority shareholder. We spent the next hour discussing immediate next steps, how to announce the ownership change, how to handle Richard and Trevor's departures, how to reassure employees that this wasn't the beginning of mass layoffs. Through it all, Richard sat motionless at the conference table. Finally, he looked up at me. How long were you planning this? since the day you took credit for my data flow analysis. I realized then that you didn't just want to advance your career, you wanted to erase me. So I decided to erase you instead. Difference is, I had the patience and resources to do it. Properly, Richard stood, his movements mechanical. This isn't over. Yes, Richard, it is. It's completely over. Take the severance. Don't fight this. Because if you do, every executive in the Seattle tech scene will know exactly what you did here and exactly how thoroughly you lost. Leave quietly and you can spin this however you want at your next position. Come at me legally and I'll bury you. He left without another word. Trevor followed 30 seconds later. Security met them in the hallway to collect their badges and escort them to their offices for personal belongings removal. After they were gone, Lisa turned to me. That was the most prepared termination I've ever witnessed. You didn't just document his behavior, you acquired the company. That's a level of commitment to revenge I've genuinely never seen. Not revenge, I corrected her. Protection. Richard was going to fire me probably within the next month. Then he was going to systematically remove anyone he saw as a threat to his vision of Apex. I've seen it happen at other companies. A narcissistic COO or CFO gets control, replaces all the technical leadership with their own people, alienates the client base, and runs the company into the ground. I wasn't going to let that happen here. James nodded thoughtfully. So what now? You're the majority shareholder of a $40 million company. You're 42 years old. You've just made yourself very wealthy and very powerful. What's the next move? I looked around the conference room, the same room where Richard had tried to destroy me 30 minutes earlier. Honestly, get back to work. I have a development team that's been operating under chaotic leadership for 9 months. I have client relationships to rebuild. I have a product roadmap to fix. The ownership change is significant, but the work is the same. Build great software. Serve our clients well. Treat our people fairly. Vincent laughed, a genuine sound of delight. You really did this just to get back to doing your job properly, pretty much. Though I admit, the look on Richard's face when he opened that folder was worth every penny I spent. The paperwork took 3 more weeks to fully process. Mitchell handled the formal board notifications, the updated shareholder agreements, and the regulatory filings. Paul transitioned into the CEO role smoothly. He'd essentially been doing the job anyway. This just made it official. Vincent stayed on as board chairman but reduced his day-to-day involvement, spending more time in Arizona like he'd wanted. The employee reaction was almost universally positive. Richard hadn't been popular, and his sudden departure was celebrated more than mourned. When I sent a company-wide email explaining that I was now the majority shareholder and committed to maintaining Apex's technical focus and culture, I got dozens of supportive responses. Several developers who'd quit under Trevor's regime reached out about coming back. The only difficult conversation was with Richard's wife, Amanda. She called me 2 days after his termination, angry and hurt. You destroyed my husband's career over a grudge. He told me what you did, how you manipulated everything. I kept my voice neutral. Amanda, I'm sorry you're caught in this. But Richard systematically sabotaged my work, stole credit for my contributions, and tried to have me terminated with false documentation. I have evidence of all of it. He didn't lose his career over a grudge. He lost it because he couldn't resist destroying someone he viewed as competition, and he underestimated that person's ability to respond. She hung up on me. I understood. From her perspective, her husband had been ambushed and humiliated. She didn't know or chose not to believe what he'd actually done. The business impact was immediate and positive. Without Richard's interference, project timelines stabilized. Client satisfaction scores increased. We closed 2 major deals that had been stalled because Richard kept inserting himself into technical discussions he didn't understand. Revenue in my first quarter as majority shareholder increased 12% over the previous quarter. Paul turned out to be an excellent CEO. He understood that his role was to handle the business operations and relationships while I focused on technical strategy and product development. We met twice a week to align on direction, but he trusted my judgment on anything technical, and I trusted his on anything operational. The data flow integration, the acquisition Richard had taken credit for, turned into exactly the success I'd predicted. Within 6 months of having competent technical leadership fully engaged, we'd integrated their algorithms into our core platform and launched 3 new product modules that opened up markets in healthcare and logistics. Those modules added 14 million in annual recurring revenue. Paul made sure everyone knew the integration success was built on the original analysis I'd done 2 years earlier. I didn't hear from Richard again until about 8 months after his termination. He sent an email to my personal address, not my work email. No subject line, just 3 paragraphs. Nathan, I've had time to reflect on what happened at Apex. My therapist suggested I might benefit from acknowledging my role in how things ended. You were right about most of it. I did take credit for your work. I did try to push you out. I convinced myself it was necessary for the company's evolution, but honestly, I was threatened by you. You were smarter than me technically, and the founders respected you. I couldn't compete on merit, so I competed politically. I'm not asking for forgiveness or trying to restart a relationship. I'm working at a smaller firm now in a reduced role, and I'm trying to be better about respecting people's contributions. I wanted you to know that what you did, buying the company, the documentation, the timing, it was brilliant. I was so focused on the political game that I never considered someone might just change who owned the board. That's on me. I hope Apex continues to thrive. Despite everything, I do believe you'll be good for that company. You care about it in a way I never did. I read it 3 times. There was no apology exactly, just acknowledgement. I wasn't sure if it was genuine remorse or just another manipulation. Richard trying to rebuild his reputation by seeming reflective and mature. Either way, it didn't matter. He was out of my life and out of Apex's future. I never responded to the email. Trevor, on the other hand, tried a different approach. He filed a wrongful termination lawsuit claiming I'd fired him in retaliation for his whistleblowing concerns about my leadership. His attorney sent an aggressive demand letter threatening to expose corporate governance failures and hostile work environment issues. Mitchell's response was surgical. He sent back a detailed letter with exhibits showing that Trevor had been terminated during his probationary period, which was explicitly allowed under his employment contract for any reason or no reason. He included documentation that Trevor had never raised any whistleblowing concerns through proper channels, had no evidence of any governance failures, and had himself created a hostile environment by implementing bureaucratic approval processes that served no purpose except to consolidate his own authority. The letter concluded with an offer. Trevor could withdraw his lawsuit and accept his severance package, or we could proceed to discovery, where we'd subpoena all his communications with Richard, including the text messages where they discussed strategies for marginalizing me and other long-term employees. Mitchell noted that such communications might be of interest not just to our case, but potentially to other former employees who might have their own claims about constructive termination. Trevor withdrew the lawsuit within a week. The first year as majority shareholder taught me things about leadership I'd never fully understood before. Power isn't just about making decisions. It's about creating the conditions where the right decisions become obvious to everyone. I could have come in after acquiring Apex and started firing people indiscriminately, restructuring departments, imposing my vision through force. Instead, I removed the one person who was poisoning the culture, promoted people who'd been held back by Richard's politics, and then got out of their way. Our VP of Sales, a woman named Priya Mehta who Richard had constantly undermined, turned out to be phenomenal when she had actual support from leadership. She landed a contract with a Fortune 500 client that became our largest account. Our CFO, who'd been quietly frustrated with Richard's financial projections that prioritized optics over accuracy, restructured our budgeting process to be more realistic and transparent. Our client satisfaction scores hit record highs because we stopped overpromising due to Richard's aggressive sales tactics and started delivering exactly what we said we would. By the 18-month mark, Apex's revenue had grown to 56 million annually. We'd hired 40 new employees, all of them cultural fits who shared our values around technical excellence and treating people with respect. Employee retention was the highest it had been in 5 years. We'd won 2 industry awards for product innovation. Paul approached me one afternoon in my office. He looked pleased but slightly awkward. "Nathan, I've got something I want to run by you. Vincent and I have been talking, and we'd like to propose something. We want to sell you the rest of our combined equity. Not immediately, but over the next 3 years through a structured buyout. We'll stay involved. I'll continue as CEO, Vincent will stay on the board, but we want to fully transition ownership to you. I set down the technical specification I'd been reviewing. That's a significant proposal. Can I ask why? Paul sat down across from my desk. Because you've proven this isn't about ego or revenge or building some empire. You genuinely love this company and understand what makes it special. Vincent and I built Apex, but we're in our 60s now. We want to ensure it stays independent and stays focused on the things that matter. You're the right person to own it, not some private equity firm, not a strategic acquirer who'll gut the culture. You. How much equity are we talking about? Our combined 47%, which would give you full ownership. Paul named a price, structured over 3 years with company profits funding most of the buyout. It was generous to them, but feasible for me given Apex's improving financial position. I thought about it for maybe 30 seconds. Let's do it. Mitchell can work out the details with your attorneys. Paul smiled broadly. I thought you'd try to negotiate. I trust you. You and Vincent built something worth preserving. If you think I'm the right person to own it completely, I'm honored. The full buyout completed over the next 32 months, exactly as structured. By my 45th birthday, I owned 100% of Apex Solutions. Paul stayed on as CEO for another year, then retired to travel with his wife. I promoted Priya to CEO. She'd earned it and was better at the role than I would have been. I kept my focus on Chief Technology Officer responsibilities, which was always where I belonged. Apex today is a $78 million company with 310 employees. We've acquired 2 smaller firms that complemented our technology stack. Both integrated smoothly because we respected their cultures instead of destroying them. We've turned down 4 acquisition offers from larger competitors because staying independent matters more than cashing out. Our employee retention rate is 93%. Our client renewal rate is 96%. I still. Think about the moment Richard opened that folder and saw the ownership documents. The look on his face. The way his confidence just evaporated. I won't pretend it wasn't satisfying. But what's more satisfying is what happened after. Building something sustainable. Creating an environment where talented people can do their best work without political games or credit theft. Honoring what Julia wanted me to become, someone who doesn't just absorb mistreatment but actively protects what matters. The lesson I learned through all of this isn't about revenge. It's about strategic patience. When someone is actively trying to destroy you, fighting them directly often plays into their hands. They've chosen the battlefield. They've set the rules. You're reacting to their moves. But if you can step back, identify what they actually value, and quietly undermine it while they're focused on attacking you, that's when you win. Not just the immediate fight, but the whole war. Richard valued control and credit. So I took away his ability to control anything and ensured everyone knew exactly who'd done the work he claimed. Trevor valued bureaucratic authority, so I eliminated his entire position. They were so focused on managing me out that they never considered I might be building something that made their positions irrelevant. I keep Julia's photo on my desk, a candid shot from a hiking trip we took a year before her diagnosis. She's laughing at something I said, her head thrown back, completely unself-conscious. Sometimes when I'm making difficult decisions, I look at that photo and ask what she'd think. I imagine her being proud that I finally learned to fight for things that matter. Proud that I built something worth protecting. Proud that I kept my promise to stop being passive. 3 months ago, I got a LinkedIn message from someone I didn't recognize, a woman named Steph Corrigan. She introduced herself as a senior director at a tech firm in Portland. She explained that she'd recently interviewed Richard for a VP position at her company and had noticed some inconsistencies in his resume, particularly around his accomplishments at Apex. She'd found my name as the owner of Apex and wondered if I could provide a reference. I could have declined. I could have given a bland, neutral response. Instead, I scheduled a call with her. I explained, factually and without embellishment, what Richard had done at Apex, the credit theft, the sabotage, the false documentation, the attempt to terminate me. I told her I had extensive documentation if she wanted to review it. Steph was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "Thank you for being honest. We had concerns, but his previous references were all glowing. This explains a lot. I never found out if Richard got that job. I assume he didn't. I don't feel guilty about it. People like Richard move from company to company, damaging good people and taking credit for work they didn't do. At some point, someone has to be willing to tell the truth about them. I'm willing, Last week I had coffee with Vincent. He's 70 now, still sharp but moving slower. We talked about the early days of Apex, about the risks he and Paul took to build it, about how close it came to failing multiple times in the first 5 years. Then he asked me what I planned to do with the company long-term. Keep building it, I said. Eventually, maybe transition ownership to employees through an ESOP structure so the people who make Apex successful actually own it. But that's 10 years out at least. Vincent nodded approvingly. That's the right answer. Companies aren't supposed to be vehicles for one person's wealth. They're supposed to be communities of people building something together. That's what Julia understood that I didn't for a long time. She saw that I was talented and capable, but I treated my career like something that happened to me instead of something I controlled. When Richard started his campaign against me, my first instinct was to accept it, to believe maybe I really was expendable. Julia would have told me that was garbage. She would have told me to fight, to use my intelligence and resources to protect what I'd built. I'm glad I finally learned that lesson. I just wish she'd been here to see it. The story of how I became the majority shareholder of Apex Solutions isn't really about business or revenge or corporate politics. It's about understanding that sometimes the people trying to destroy you are only successful if you accept their narrative about your value. Richard told everyone I was expendable. He told the board. He told his allies. He probably even convinced himself. But he was wrong. And I had the patience, resources, and strategic thinking to prove it in a way that couldn't be disputed or argued. When you know you're right about something important, when you know you're protecting something that matters, you have an advantage that political manipulators can never match. You're willing to invest everything because the cause is bigger than your ego. Richard was playing office politics. I was defending a company and a community. Those are very different motivations with very different outcomes. Now when I walk through Apex's offices, I see people who are engaged, respected, and doing meaningful work. I see a company that's growing because we focus on excellence and treating people fairly. I see the thing Richard tried to corrupt, restored, and thriving. That matters more than his humiliation, though I won't deny his humiliation was a satisfying bonus. Sometimes I wonder what my life would look like if I'd just accepted Richard's narrative. If I'd let him push me out, taken whatever severance he offered, and found another job somewhere, I'd probably be fine. I'm good at what I do. I'd land somewhere, but Apex would be different. Richard would have continued his pattern, taking credit, marginalizing talent, building a culture of fear and politics. Good people would have left. Clients would have become frustrated. Eventually, the company would have declined or been acquired by someone who'd strip it for parts. By refusing to be expendable, I saved more than my career. I saved something Julia and I both cared about, a community of people building something excellent together. That's the real victory, not the moment Richard's face went white, not the moment I fired him in front of the board. Those were just tactics. The victory is what Apex became after he was gone. The victory is 310 people who come to work knowing their contributions matter and will be recognized. The victory is a company that does what it promises and treats people with dignity. Richard taught me something valuable, even though he didn't mean to. He taught me that sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't anger or confrontation. It's patience and strategy. It's building something so strong that the betrayer becomes irrelevant. It's winning so completely that there's no argument to be had. I'm 45 years old. I own a $78 million company. I have work I love and people I respect. I kept my promise to Julia. And I proved that when someone calls you expendable, the best response is to make yourself indispensable, then buy the company and fire them. That's justice. That's strategy. That's how you win.